Sintra is a town and a municipality in the Grande Lisboa sub-region of Portugal, considered part of the Portuguese Riviera. The municipality contains two cities, Queluz and Agualva-Cacém. The population in 2011 was 377,835, in an area of 319.23 square kilometers. Sintra is known for its many 19th-century Romantic architectural monuments, which has resulted in its classification as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Although its heritage in buildings and nature is the most visible face of the historic individuality of Sintra, a whole literary heritage has made the area a legendary reference in Portuguese culture. It has become a major tourist center, visited by many day trippers who travel from the centre and suburbs of the capital Lisbon. In addition to the Sintra Mountains and Sintra Cascais Nature Park, the parishes of the town of Sintra are dotted with royal retreats, estates, castles and other buildings, including the medieval Castelo dos Mouros, the Penha National Palace and the Sintra National Palace. History. It was in Penha that the earliest remnants of human occupation were discovered. These vestiges testify to an occupation dating to the early Paleolithic. Comparable remnants were discovered in an open-air site in São Pedro de Canafarime, alongside the chapel of the Castelo dos Mouros, dating back to the Neolithic, and include decorated ceramics and microlithic flint utensils from the 5th century B.C. Ceramic fragments found locally, including many late Chalcolithic vases from the Sintra Mountains, suggest that between the 4th and 3rd millennia B.C., the region was occupied by a Neolithic, Chalcolithic settlement, with characteristics comparable to fortified settlements in Lisbon and Setúbal. The evidence discovered in Quinta das Sequoias and São Pedro de Canafarime contrasts dramatically with those remnants discovered in the walled town of Penha and the funerary monument of Bela Vista. Traces of several Bronze Age remains were also discovered in many places in the Sintra Mountains, including alongside the town, in the Monte de Sereno area, and a late Bronze Age settlement within the Moorish castle dating to the 9th–6th century B.C. The most famous object from this period is the so-called Sintra collar, a Middle Bronze Age gold neck ring found near the city at the end of the 19th century, which since 1900 has been part of the British Museum's collection. Relatively close by, in Santa Eufemia da Serra, is an Iron Age settlement where artifacts from indigenous tribes and peoples of Mediterranean origins were also discovered. These date from the early 4th century, prior to the Romanization of the peninsula, which in the area of Foz de Tejo took place in the middle of the 2nd century B.C. Close proximity to a large commercial center founded by Turguali tribes in the first half of the 1st millennium A.D. meant that the region of Sintra was influenced by human settlement throughout various epochs. Cultures that have left remains in the area to this day. The toponym Sintra derives from the medieval Suntria, and points to an association with radical Indo-European cultures. The word translates into bright star or sun, commonly significant in those cultures. Marcus Terentius Varro and Cadizi and Lucio Junio Moderato Columella designated the place the Sacred Mountain, and Ptolemy referred to it as the Mountains of the Moon. During the Roman occupation of the peninsula, the region of Sintra was part of the vast Civitas Ipponens, which Caesar, or more likely Octavius, granted the status of Municipium Civium Romanorum. The various residents of the region were considered part of the Roman Gaul area, and in the present village of Sintra there are Roman remains, testifying to a Roman presence from the 1st–2nd century BC to the 5th century AD. a roadway along the southeast part of the Sintra Mountains and connected to the main road to Elisipo, dates from this period. This via followed the route of the current Rua da Ferrari, the Calçada dos Clérigos and the Calçada da Trindade, following the Roman custom of siting tombs along the roads and near the homes. There is also evidence of inscriptions pertaining to Roman funeral monuments, dating mainly to the 2nd century. It was during the Moorish occupation of Sintra that Greco-Latin writers wrote of the explicit occupation of the area of the town centre. A description by the geographer Albiacer described Sintra as one of the towns that dependent on Lisbon in Al-Andalus, in proximity to the sea, characterizing it as permanently submersed in a fog that never dissipates. During the Reconquista, its principal center and castle were isolated by Christian armies. Following the fall of the Caliphate of Córdoba, the king of Eliaquito Alfonso VI received in the spring of 1093 the cities of Santarém, Lisbon and the castle of Sintra. This followed a period of internal instability within the Muslim taifas of the peninsula, and in particular the decision by the king of Badajoz, Umar ibn Muhammad al-Mutawakkil, who, after hesitating from 1090 to 1091, placed his territory under the suzerainty of Alfonso VI of the Almoravid. Afonso took the cities and the castle of Sintra between the 30th of April and the 8th of May 1093, but shortly after the transfer Sintra and Lisbon were conquered by the Almoravid. Santarém was saved by Henry, who Afonso VI nominated Count of Portugal in 1096, to replace Raymond of Burgundy. Kingdom. In July 1109, Count Henry reconquered the castle of Sintra. This was preceded a year before by an attempt by Prince Sigurd the Crusader, son of Magnus III of Norway, to capture the castle from the Moors in the course of his trek to the Holy Land. Sigurd's forces disembarked at the mouth of the Queluz River but failed to take the castle. It was only after the conquest of Lisbon in October 1147 by Afonso Henriques that the castle surrendered in November. It was integrated into Christian dominions along with Almada and Palmela after the surrender. Afonso Henriques established the church of São Pedro de Canaferim within the walls of the Moorish castle to mark his success. On the 9th of January 1154, Afonso Henriques signed a foral for the town of Sintra, with all its respective regalia. The charter established the municipality of Sintra, whose territory encompassed a large area, eventually divided into 4 great parishes: São Pedro de Canaferim, São Martinho, Santa Maria, and São Miguel. The early municipal seat, the town of Sintra, was the center of a significant Sephardic community, with a synagogue and quarter. This community was not limited to Sintra town. Enclaves are mentioned during the reign of King Denis in Queluz, but were heavily pressured by the influx of Christian serfs. Throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, owing to the fertility of the land, various convents, monasteries and military orders constructed residences, estates, watermills and vineyards. There are municipal records from this period of a number of donations and grants between 1157 and 1158. Afonso Henriques donated to the Master of the Knights Templar, Gualdem Pais, various houses and estates in the center of Sintra. In 1210, the monastery of Santa Cruz in Coimbra acquired 4 houses in Portuguese, releasing them in 1230, while in 1264 it controlled homes and vineyards in Almagim. In 1216 the monastery of São Vicente de Fora also held a vineyard in Queluz, and, in 1218, estates in Queluz and Barota. At some time between 1223 and 1245, the monastery of Santa Maria de Alcobaça held various privileges in the territory. The military order of Santiago owned an estate in Arifana in 1260. Many of Afonso Henrique's donations in the 12th century, including privileges assigned to these institutions, were confirmed in 1189 by his son, Sancho I, corresponding to a social, political and economic strategy during the post-Reconquista era. Consequently, after 1261, Sintra had a local administration consisting of an alcalde representing the crown, and 2 local judges elected by the public. During the political conflict between King Sancho II and the churches of São Pedro and São Martinho, which belonged to the king, were ceded to the Bishop of Lisbon and Execute. Yet the crown's patrimony was defined early. In 1287, King Denis donated to Queen Elizabeth of Portugal the town, the seigneurial holdings and all their associated benefits. Later, these lands were transferred to the young Infante Afonso and remained in his possession until 1334, before reverting to the ownership of the Queen. The Black Death arrived in Sintra in the 14th century. In 1350, the disease is known to have caused the death of 5 municipal scribes. Far greater numbers of deaths probably resulted, perhaps owing to the cool climate and humidity, conditions that favored the rapid spread of the disease. During the reign of King Ferdinand, Sintra played a part in the controversial marriage of the monarch to Doña Leonor Telles de Menezes. In 1374, the king donated Sintra to the Lady Telles, whom he eventually married in secret in the north of the country. Along with Sintra, the king conceded the municipalities of Villavicosa, Abrantes and Almada, to the consternation of his private council. Following a confrontation, the king abandoned his duties and travelled to Sintra, where he remained for a month on the pretext of hunting. As Sintra was located relatively close to Lisbon, many of its people were called to work on projects for the crown in the capital. In 1373, King Ferdinand decided to wall the city, and requested funds for workers from coastal lands in Almada, Sesibra, Palmela, Setúbal, Coina, Benavente and Samora Correia, as well as all of Ribatejo, and from the inland areas of Sintra, Cascais, Torres Vedras, Alenque, Iruda, Atuguia, Lourinhã, Teleiros and Mafra. During the dynastic crisis between 1383 to 1385, Sintra joined Leonor Telles in supporting the proclamation of her daughter, Beatrice, who married John I of Castile, as Queen of Portugal and Castile. After the defeat of the Castilian army at Aljubarrota by Portuguese and English troops, commanded by Nuno Alvarez Pereira, Sintra became one of the last places to surrender to the master of Aviz, later King of Portugal. João Namp, Philippine era. John, first king of the Second Dynasty, broke the tradition of transferring Sintra to the Casa da Reina. Probably around 1383, John I granted the lands of Sintra to Count Enrique Manuel de Villena, quickly revoking the decision after Enrique took the Infanta's side during the dynastic quarrel. Sintra, therefore, continued as a possession of the king, who expanded the local estate. Until the end of the 17th century, the royal palace constituted one of the principal residences and summer estates of the court. It was from here that John decided to conquer Ceuta. King Afonso V was born and died at the palace, and here King John II was acclaimed sovereign. In a document issued in 1435 by King Edward, the region was described as a land of good air and water and of the comarcas with an abundance in the sea inland, our most laurel city of Lisbon being so near, and being in its efficient diversions, and the distractions of the mountains and hunting. During the Portuguese Age of Discovery, several people born in Sintra were written into history. In 1443, Goncalo de Sintra, squire in the house of the Infante Henry, was sent by the prince as captain of a caravel to the coast of Africa. He explored the region near the Ouro River and eventually died there in 1444. Pedro de Sintra and Soeiro da Costa later mapped most of the Atlantic coast of Africa, around the time of Henry's death in 1460. At the end of the 15th century, the importance of Sintra on official itineraries led Queen Eleanor of Viseu, then principal benefactor of the Portuguese Misericórdias, to expand her principal institutions in Sintra. The Hospital Faria do Espírito Santo, the only remnant of which left standing is a chapel to São Lázaro, was constructed to provide assistance and support to lepers in the region. In 1545, the hospital was transferred to the administration of the Santa Casa de Misericordia of Sintra, which was set up by Queen Catherine of Austria, wife of John III. King Manuel I enjoyed spending his summers in Sintra due to its cool climate and abundance of game, as Damião de Goes, his chronicler, noted, because it is one of the places in Europe that is cooler and cheerful for whichever king, prince or master to pass the time, because, in addition to its good airs that cross its mountains, called by the older peoples the promontory of the moon, there is here much hunting of deer and other animals, and overall many good trout of many type, and in which in all of Hispania there can be found a many springs of water. Between the 15th and 16th century, after travelling to the Crown of Castile and the Crown of Aragon when being considered as heir to the kingdoms in 1498, the king transformed and enriched the town and its region with several public works. These included the reconstruction of the old Gothic church of São Martinho, and in 1511 the construction of the monastery of Nossa Senhora da Penha, the highest peak of the Sintra Mountains, which he then transferred to the Order of St. Jerome. In the second half of the 16th century, Sintra was a centre for courtesans, and members of the aristocracy began building estates and farms within the region. In this rural environment, from 1542, the Viceroy of India, D. João de Castro, began residing at Quinta da Penha Verde, where he collected examples of Portuguese culture of the time, including works by celebrated artist Francisco de Holanda. It was during this cultural renaissance that the marble chancel sculpted between 1529 and 1532 by Nicolau Chantarine for the chapel of the monastery of Nossa Senhora da Penha was completed, as was the portico of the church of Nossa Senhora da Conceição da Algueira. Luís de Camões referred to the mountains of Sintra in his Os Lusíadas Chronicle as a mythic land ruled by water nymphs. The Renaissance poet Louise Asigia, Sintra Aloysia Sige in Paris and Madrid, referred to Sintra as a pleasant valley, between cliffs that rise into the heavens, curved in graceful hills among which one can feel the murmur of the waters. Everything, in fact, will enchant and perfume the environment with its fragrance and fruit. With the death of the Cardinal King Henry, Philip II of Spain inherited the Kingdom of Portugal, initiating a personal union of the crowns that would last until 1640. During this period, Portuguese political power moved from Sintra to Vila Viçosa, principal centre of the House of Braganza, whose dukes, descendants of John of Portugal, were heirs to the throne of Portugal. Following the decision of the Cortes of Tomar in 1581, Philip as King of Portugal accepted an administration composed of the Portuguese aristocracy. He passed through Sintra around October 1581, visiting the monasteries and churches. It was during this period that cult of Sebastianism, the hope for the return of King Sebastian, came to an end, when several fake Sebastians were denounced. In 1585, Mateus Alvarez, born on the island of Terceira in the Azores and guardian of the Hermitage of São Julio, passed himself off as King Sebastian and created conflict in Sintra, Madra, Rio de Muro and Ericeira. The Sebastian adventure ended with the hanging of 30 people and the suffering of many more. It was not surprising, therefore, that the visit in 1619 by King Philip IV of Spain resulted in many families escaping to the hills. During this union, Sintra was a privileged place for Portuguese exiles from the Castilian court. Nobles who wished to distance themselves from Spanish nobility would purchase lands in the region, away from court intrigue. At the time of the Restoration, in 1640, the municipality had approximately 4,000 residents. Brigantine era, the war with Spain, the affirmation of Mafra during the reign of John V of Portugal through the construction of the Palace Convent, and later the construction of Royal Palace of Queluz in 1747 during the reigns of Joseph I of Portugal and Maria I of Portugal, helped diminish royal visits to the region. During this time there were only 2 documented visits, in 1652 and 1654, respectively, the visit of Queen Luisa de Gusmão and King John IV of Portugal and the final burial of King Afonso VI, alleging the insanity of the king and the incapacity of the heir. The Duke of Kidnavel and the Infante Peter led a coup d'état in 1667 which resulted in the resignation of the Count of Castelomelo, minister of King Afonso VI, and the imprisonment of the monarch. In 1668 the Cortes of Lisbon confirmed the Infante Peter, the king's brother, as regent and heir. Afonso VI lived the rest of his life imprisoned in the Paço da Ribeira, in the fort of São João Baptista, in Angra, in the Azores, and in the end, with the discovery of a conspiracy to kill the regent, in the Paço da Vila in Sintra. For the 17th to the 18th centuries, the region was centre of contemplative religious orders who established convents in Sintra, but it remained a place of myths, with a large mysterious forest and macabre, gloomy spaces. Father Bayão in his Portugal Cuidadazo noted, next to the palace of Sintra was a forest, so thick that during the day it cast fear in him who entered it. And Sebastian was free from these fears, that he would walk at night through it, many times for 2 or 3 hours, starting in the second half of the 18th century and lasting through the 19th century. Sintra became known as a nostalgic and mysterious location, described by many foreigners. It was the romantic Lord Byron's glorioso Eden, Almeida Garrett's pleasant resort, Isia de Queiros's nest of lovers, the romantic foliage. The nobles abandoned themselves in the hands of the poets, or the place where Richard Strauss saw a garden comparable to Italy, Sicily, Greece or Egypt, a true garden of Klingsor, and there in the heights, a castle of the Holy Grail. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake, meanwhile, caused the destruction of the centre of Sintra as well as a number of deaths, resulting in building and restoration in the second half of the 18th century. Also in the 18th century, the first industrial building was established in the town, the Fábrica de Estamparia de Rio de Muro in 1778. The visit of Queen Maria I in 1787 brought about the restoration and redecoration of a few salons and chambers in the municipal buildings. The great festivities 1795 to celebrate the baptism of the Infante Antonio, son of John VI, resulted in grand balls at the Palace of Queluz. In 1838 the king consort, Ferdinand II, bought the monastery of Nossa Senhora da Penha and a vast adjacent area, commissioning the architect José de Costa e Silva to construct an arch joining the 2 quarters of the Setiais Palace, to commemorate the 1802 visit of the princes and princess of Brazil, the Infante João and Carlos Carlo to Joaquina, and the subsequent visit of the son, the absolutist King Miguel, in 1830. During the third quarter of the 18th century and practically all of the 19th century, foreign travelers and Portuguese aristocrats, fired by Romanticism, rediscovered the magic of Sintra, especially in its exotic landscapes and climate. In the summer of 1787, William Beckford stayed with the Marquis of Marialva, master of the horse for the kingdom, at his residence of Setiais. At the beginning of the 19th century, Princess Carlota Joaquina, wife of the regent John, bought the estate and Ramalho Palace. Between 1791 and 1793, Gerard de Visme constructed a neo-Gothic mansion on his extensive estate in the Quinta de Montserrat. Beckford, who remained in Sintra, rented the property from de Visme in 1794. The landscape, covered in fog, also attracted another Englishman, Francis Cook, who occupied the estate, constructing an oriental pavilion. The Palace of Penha, Sintra's exemplary Portuguese romantic symbol, was initiated by the king consort Ferdinand, husband of Queen Maria of Portugal, a German-born member of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. The palace was built over the remains of the 16th-century monastery of the Order of St. Jerome, conserving many fundamental aspects, including the church cloister and a few dependencies. The architecture is eclectic, influenced by many architectural styles. The design was a project of the Baron von Esquerge and Ferdinand II, to substitute the Sintra National Palace as an alternative to the summer residence in Cascais. After Sintra, the monarchs Louis of Portugal and Carlos of Portugal ended the summers with visits to Cascais in the months of September and October. In 1854, the first contract was signed to construct a rail link between Sintra and Lisbon. A decree signed on the 26th of June 1855 regulated the contract between the government and Count Clarange's Lucot, but was later rescinded in 1861. The connection was finally inaugurated on the 2nd of April 1887. By the beginning of the 20th century, Sintra was recognized as a summer resort visited by aristocrats and millionaires. Among these, Carvalho Monteiro, owner of a considerable fortune, constructed near the main town on an estate he bought from the Baroness of Regaleira, a luxurious revivalist palacete, based on a neo-Manuelan architecture. From the second half of the 19th century into the first decades of the 20th century, Sintra also became a privileged place for artists, musicians such as Viana da Mota, composers such as Alfredo Gil, painters like João Cristino da Silva, writers such as Isiada Queiroz Ramalho or Degas. All these people lived, worked, and got inspiration from Sintra's landscapes. Republic. The proclamation of a Portuguese republic in 1910 transformed the bohemian climate of Sintra. Economic development was now promoted, the potential benefits to the region of growth in agriculture, industry and commerce were promoted to foster development. In 1908 a wine-growing zone had been demarcated in Queluz. Now a commission was established to monitor the quality of wines and promote their exportation, and in 1914 a commercial association was set up to manage the concession. Meanwhile, in the name of secular and popular progress, parts of the cultural heritage were destroyed, including the annexes of the medieval village bordering the palace in 1911, while the nave of the Church of the Misericordia was reduced to the presbytery to allow the road to be widened. The first decades of the 20th century were the time of the fastest urbanization of the town, supported by its rail link to Lisbon and the influx of summer travelers. Damage to culturally important sites led during the 1920s to the creation of institutions to study and protect the vast artistic heritage. The institutions Instituto Histórico de Sintra, under the direction of Afonso de Ornelas, played an important part in this period. Archaeological studies resulted in considerable development. In 1927, Felix Alves Pereira rediscovered the Neolithic settlements of Santa Eufemia, and the first publication of the discoveries at the prehistoric monuments of Praia das Macas were completed in 1929. For this time until the 1970s, coastal Sintra was becoming a summer destination, resulting in the building of Portuguese summer residences. Many important Portuguese architects developed projects in the area in the first half of the 20th century, including Raul Lino, Norte Jr. and Tertuliano de Alassa de Marques. These projects benefited town and region, increased tourism and attracted as residents many notable Portuguese. Historian Francisco Costa, writer Ferreira de Castro, sculptor and Teixeira, architects Norte Jr. and Raul Lino, painters Eduardo Viana, Mili Poços and Vieira da Silva, poet Oliva Guerra, composer and maestro Frederico de Freitas, historians Felix Alves Pereira and João Martins da Silva Marques. In 1944, prior to his arrest, Vichy France Prime Minister Pierre Laval had planned to move to an estate in Sintra, where a house had been leased for him. Urban anarchy predominated until the middle of the 1980s in the areas adjacent to the main town of Sintra, resulting in the development of new neighborhoods. The 1949 municipal plan by de Groa was devised to protect the town and its neighborhood from uncontrolled urbanization, and resulted in the maintenance of an environment comparable to 19th-century Sintra.